Welcome in, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. This webinar is going to be an exciting opportunity for all of you to learn the transition from ECC's warehouse management to S4HANA's extended warehouse management. Whether you are confident or confused, our supply chain artisans will highlight the importance of considering business needs and potential licensing impacts, along with recognizing advanced features and technology challenge involved in the move to EWM. Today, while Jason and Steve will take about 30 minutes to guide you through the differences of ECC's warehouse management versus S4's extended warehouse management, we encourage you to take any questions in the question section or chat. We will have time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that you may have. At this time, I would like to introduce you to today's speakers, Jason and Steve. Jason specializes in helping companies align their technology strategy with business objectives to drive value by enabling end-to-end connection of people, process, and technology. Steve specializes in warehouse design, operations, optimizations, moves, and expansions. Now I will hand you off to our speakers.
Thanks, Sam. Hey all, this is Jason. Welcome to our webinar. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you stand. Quick introduction. I want to make sure everybody understands we have 30 minutes, so we're gonna have to go pretty fast. And EWM and warehouse management in general is a pretty big topic. Please give us some grace if we don't cover everything you're interested in understanding today. Our goal here is to give you sort of an overview of some key things that you want to do to try to prepare for your migration to EWM, or some things you might do if you're already there, and some key differences between ECC and S4, and as well as the different deployment options for EWM in the S4 world. We're going to try to keep this pretty quick, pretty business focused, although there is some good stuff for the IT guys down towards the end. And in general, hopefully it will be informative. If you have things that you'd like to talk about that we don't cover, then by all means reach out through the questions, and we will follow up after the fact if necessary, so we can go into more detail. And we'll have some follow-on presentations down the road, some white papers, blog posts, and additional webinars that will go into more detail around specific areas. So this is just to get you started. And so with that, I'm gonna hand it over here to Skinnell, and we're gonna start talking a little bit about key differences. So I mentioned our friend Steve Kinnell, who is affectionately known as Skinnell here at Reveal, because we have a lot of Stevens. So Skinnell, you've been around the block a few times with warehouses and seen many different types of operations. What do you see out in the world, and maybe where do people want to think about getting started with this whole process?
Yes. Hello, Jason. Thank you. Hello, everyone else. So one of the most common challenges and things that I see across WM and EWM really starts with poor housekeeping. And when I'm speaking of housekeeping, I mean some overdue elements. So the system has a lot of embedded or built-in standard tools, such as the warehouse activity monitor there and WM on the left, which is EWM. And then you also have the warehouse monitor on the right. These two mechanisms in SAP are communicating to you daily. It's almost like a proactive approach of, hey, for the warehouse activity monitor, this has surpassed a time element, and therefore it's critical in a potential supply chain disruption. The monitor, on the other hand, in EWM, same thing, more live data, but both of these tools are really used to dictate and steer the ship of your warehouse, so to speak. So the issue really comes when a lot of these dates are overdue. SAP still thinks that delivery is coming in tomorrow, and then you end up just skipping that, etc. And these things just compound, and then you get a lot of clutter in the system. So a lot of these tools could be leveraged to really clean your warehouse elements and to clean the house from that perspective.
Have you got any stories to share that may make this a bit more real for folks?
Coming into really, so my background, I ran a warehouse, and It was one of the least efficient in the network when I took it on, as some of you probably have experienced maybe the same thing. So it was daunting seeing all these overdue elements. And really what happened is I went into LL1, but there wasn't ownership established. And that was probably some of the warehouse folks didn't know it existed. And then there just wasn't ownership. So I can't emphasize that enough, and that's exactly what we did, is we kind of split this report up and divvied it up by function and by area in the warehouse. And once ownership was established, that's when you could start chipping away at this thing, because then you have, right, responsibility, and then our supply chain service levels to our end users, so to our customers, to our suppliers, all started to incrementally improve because we were just simply just working this every single day. But if you don't know, I guess you don't know.
And I think you tend to find a lot of opportunity around just the warehouse structure in general as you get into some of these clients as well.
Yeah, so on this report too, this slide is, so beyond your warehouse activity monitor, there's other really excellent tools also to leverage. So these are really more industry specific. WM and EWM have tools that you can also leverage. So if we're talking shelf life, and now exactly get into some of the structural things, right? There's also, you could leverage that tool to spot shelf lives. Fixed bins is a different report and kind of dynamic of WM and EWM. So really cycle counting all comes back to the structure and SAP trying to communicate to you. But there's excellent tools to leverage really to start cleaning up some of these challenges. But the first comes with awareness. You have to know what are your processes and where to go to start cleaning up some of your challenges that you have there. And another part, and this is really, right, there's a lot of tools and infrastructure that SAP WM and EWM offer, such as storage sections here. So storage sections are really intended to group and prioritize the material flow of your inbound movements. So if those aren't aligned, or if we're using, for example, storage bin types in place of storage sections, you're not leveraging the system. By not understanding the true definition and the capability, a lot of times I see that is, right, you'll get mishaps and you're kind of missing the boat or missing an opportunity for material flow. And probably one of the biggest challenges is not using this at all. And Jason, probably one of the biggest, it's pretty amazing to see still many clients in organizations treat WM as just a record keeping tool. And you already have this wonderful asset to run your warehouse, your warehouse management system. But by not leveraging some of these rules and some of these automation opportunities is really some of the biggest challenges, because it's built for this. SAP is a rules-based engine. And by not emplacing some of these rules, you're getting back to manual processes. And manual processes by many means are not only inefficient, but they're inconsistent. And that's the biggest thing. You want to establish rules for everything in your warehouse, where materials go, where your pick path goes, because you want to maximize your real estate. You want to maximize your cube. You want to maximize out the travel distance. And then most of all, too, your actual labor hours of your staff. You don't want to have them running around all day. So really, I can't emphasize enough that you got to start, you understand these, the rules of the system, and start leveraging WM. One of the nice things that's, if your journey is to go into EWM and you're in WM, just like myself, I came from a warehouse where slotting was a big priority. And slotting is finding the most optimal location for that material. Slotting is not in WM. And the nice thing about EWM is really they took a lot, they listened to the user base, to the customers, and added the features that weren't enabled or in WM. So that doesn't mean, though, however, slotting can't be accomplished in not in WM. So a great way to start doing that is there's tools such as MCLD. LX14 is a good material analysis tool where you could look at the frequency or velocity of your materials and still slot materials. It might be more of a manual effort, but you could still get that leverage tools with the same intent of slotting. And EWM, going back to my point, it's embedded. So EWM advanced slotting is built in to EWM versus WM. You kind of have a workaround. It might be a little more challenging, but you can still accomplish slotting.
I think you touched on a point, Skinnell, that I really appreciate, and it's kind of what we as Reveal zero in on too. Is, you know, so often SAP customers, whether it's warehouse management or other areas, tend to get stuck in the transactional, and SAP just becomes a really expensive database to keep track of your transactions. You know, a lot of things move offline into spreadsheets, and it largely comes down to people not really understanding how to leverage the tool to actually run the business, which is where we come in and help with an optimization. But really appreciate that the tool is well designed. There's a lot of capability there, and it tends to be that folks just don't understand it. So it's really important to call that out, I think.
Yeah, great point, because it's not understanding it, not understanding the capability. And to your point, every time that we're doing something outside the system, whether it's a spreadsheet or even if it's a third-party tool, like for example, we use this program in WM called Slot3D. You're breaking that integration. So Slot3D, your spreadsheet, whatever the case may be, doesn't know what you're breaking that integration from your inbound side. So it could be from your procurement, it could be from your outside. So that's why we always, it's so important to leverage SAP. Everything's in there. And that way, all the calculations are the same, just everything works seamlessly because it is, again, a rules-based engine and a fully integrated system. So I can't emphasize getting in and staying in SAP enough, and especially like the graphs that are back in MCLD. Sure, there's basic graphs that kind of, you get the picture, but from EWM, you'll get the Fiori dashboards, a lot more graphical notations that really are a great upgrade from WM.
That feels like a good segue into the next section here, where we start talking about some of those key differences and what you can expect from EWM. We'll wrap back around a little bit on summarizing what you can start to do for the migration, but I think, you know, there's so much goodness in EWM, it's probably worth jumping into that now.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're transitioning to WM into your S4HANA world, you have a few options. There is if you want to stay in WM, there's a compatibility pack, which is really an optional. You have to pay for a licensing fee. The latest date was like 2030, where they're just essentially going to cut off. But really, there's no need to do that, because you have three great options that S4HANA has available to you. The first is going to be your stockroom management, which is really, you get the basic functions and features of a warehouse. So really, it's intended for your mom and pop warehouses, maybe 100 to 200 materials, I would say. You still do have the storage bins and some basic strategies, but really where it starts to get in is EWM. You want to get into EWM basic and then advanced. There's two features. Basic is embedded, so it's when it's already in S4HANA. Advanced, you do have to pay additional licensing fee, but you get many more features that you would not get in basic, and especially stockroom management. So there's a lot of differences just depending on your business needs and your requirements. But EWM basic is really WM, but upgraded. So there's still a lot of great enhancements. You get all the Fiori tiles, dashboards, enhanced processes, enhanced activity areas. You get a lot of upgraded reports and functions and features. Advanced is to the whole other level. That is really the best in class. This is where you could do kitting, slotting, labor management. That was a big piece too. I think that WM we really had to work around was, and where EWM has really taken a step forward is assigning tasks, and warehouse orders to resources. And WM is just yet a big pool of transfer orders, and it just wasn't as seamless or as easy to disseminate that work and really to dictate who gets what, and especially from the labor management perspective of in EWM Advanced, you actually have a labor management, so you can have KPIs for your staff and see how they're doing. There's even direct versus indirect tasks. So like an indirect task would be as simple as like sweeping, right? But then you have direct tasks for actual warehouse tasks. So there's such good and upgraded functionality that really wasn't there before. Dynamic cycle counting. So there's cycle counting in WM, certainly, but dynamic is at a whole other level. It's controlled in EWM, and now it's features such as, right, you could dictate for volume. So your ABC, the frequency of your count per material could be based on a dollar value. It could be based on velocity. You have many more features on how you want to split and kind of count the frequency of your materials. The integration with yard management. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest in the WM world, that kind of outbound side. So from your shipping, your deliveries, was really on the customer orders and a lot on the like SD arena. It's really come into the wheelhouse where it probably should be in the warehouse world, into EWM. So the integration with yard management and transportation management is really a lot more onerous on the warehouse. So you're now picking the like transportation units. The integration with picking and assigning dock doors and saying, hey, yep, the truck is here, I'm assigning it to this dock. So really the enhancements are real from EWM. There's just a lot of features. Again, it's just what you see there is just some high level things that you would get from WM versus EWM.
Skinner, let's talk a little bit about some industry specific things that EWM can address, because maybe this will make it a little bit more real for folks too, in terms of how EWM can help in some of these specific requirements by industry.
Yeah, excellent point. So going back to what I said earlier, EWM or SAP really listened to the user community on some of the features that they were missing in WM and really brought that forward into EWM. So I mentioned slotting. Labor management was something that really was done outside the system, is now there in the system, but they've really taken it, and SAP invests millions and millions of dollars back into their research each year. And really what they found is by industry, these are common functions that you can now get all in EWM, whether it's in basic or in EWM advanced. But you get a lot of like shelf life batch management. Again, you could do in WM, but it's a lot more enhanced. But then kitting, right? Kitting is now in EWM. So they really specified and really just shown by industry some good examples that are now all in EWM, and you do not have to go out in a spreadsheet. It's just all embedded and instant. Another nice thing is the types of warehouse. Again, you have production warehouses, certain functions, certain aspects in there. Staging is going to be, staging materials for production is going to be a big component of that. Your raw material storage from a DC, for a distribution center, swanning is going to be imperative, and you're going to replenish from potentially overstock down to fixed bins, whatever that split might look like, or maybe some of your goods to person solution. So really, there's the complexity EWM can handle of anything, of robots, of animation. I know, Jason, you're going to talk about that a little more, but they've really thought of, again, more of the functions for whatever type of warehouse you have, whether it's a DC, a service. Cross-docking is now a huge upgrade in EWM. So really thought of kind of everything through, from processes to the types of warehouse. The integration, again, we've been talking about this, but it's just they've enhanced it. So you have a lot more features that you could do with shared master data. A lot more features from your production standpoint. The integration with really your MES systems and your MII. So the important part is to not break that integration. And EWM has given you the reasons not to break that integration, because it's all those features, as we just shared in that previous few slides, it's all in EWM now. So really, the importance of integration is going to be your upstream and downstream partners, which they've really done a great job of highlighting all the features here.
I think the kind of the big piece is the analytics, right? I mean, it just takes it to a different level in terms of what you can do to analyze your business and optimize processes.
Yeah, so it's a great point. With EWM, you still have, your basic like GUI desktop where you could certainly transact, but the world, let's face it, it's going towards like building like off your cell phone, right? Off apps, and the Fiori tiles and dashboards is exactly that. So it's nice because it's the ease of use is pretty seamless now, whereas before in like WM, you had I'd go into LTO1 for this, LTO6, then there's no more. You just kind of could save your Fiori tiles and dashboards for your specific tasks, and you just kind of click away, just like you do on your phone. So the analytics, as I mentioned, showed you some of the graphs on WM, but no, you get real-time graphs that could be pie charts, line graphs, etc. All those graphs that were kind of not as pretty in WM are now really straightforward in EWM, and a great way to visualize kind of what you're seeing on the floor. Another thing too, from an analytics perspective, that you get in EWM is going to be you could have a graphical warehouse layout, which is awesome, because sure, storage bin 01 is here. What does that mean? You could really show that material flow through that tool. And then the warehouse monitor, I talked about a little bit. That's going to be your new focal point in EWM, which controls all of your transactions there. It's your one-stop shop. That is really real time. Your shipping cockpit is going to be another great analytical tool, really, with that integration of transportation management, where you can assign TUs, transportation units, to deliveries. You really get that flexibility of seeing your inbound picks from deliveries and assigning them all to dock doors, to trucks. So that's where that integration comes in with your transportation management and yard management. So the shipping cockpit is an excellent tool there.
I think the cool thing with the Fiori dashboards too is you can make it role-based, so that to your point about transactions, you don't really have to remember the transactions anymore. When you log in, depending on your role in the business, you're going to see just what you need, the key metrics that you need to keep track of. You can click into the transactions to be able to address any issues you need to do. It's a much more pleasant user experience overall. I think that it fits back to more what people are used to. Now you can download an app on your phone and do anything. So find that adoption's a lot better just because it's easier to use, from that perspective. So we have about 10 minutes left or so before we have to break for some questions, and we wanted to make sure we focus some time on deployment options, because this is an area that's super important. key thing here is you have options, lots and lots and lots of options, and it can get a little bit overwhelming, quite frankly. So you can do cloud, you can do on-prem, you can do embedded, you can do decentralized. There's so much flexibility there. It's important to kind of talk through and think through what's the best outcome for your business. So this chart gives you a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about here. So it's the considerations involved with how you deploy EWM or S. So your process complexity. One thing you want to be very aware of, EWM is a powerful tool. It can get real complicated in a hurry. And you want to make sure that you don't overdo it from a technology perspective. Sometimes people have the technology is a hammer looking for a nail. And so we're going to do it even though maybe we shouldn't. So think about that as you're considering your deployment options. So, there are, this is a little bit misleading because the whole discussion around cloud and on-prem. So public cloud is really where you're kind of at the mercy of SAP. It's almost like a software as a service. It is a software as a service. So you get what they give you. You can't customize it. You get the upgrades as it comes through. There's some advantages to that in the sense that it's pretty simple. It doesn't require a lot of support. You're limiting the amount of IT effort involved with the implementation, with the support of it and the infrastructure and all that. But you're limited on functionality as well. It doesn't even come up to the level of basic from a functionality perspective. So not a good option for more complex businesses. As we move up into more complex businesses that may need the advanced technology embedded. So that's where you start to think about embedded in S4HANA versus decentralized, which means EWM is going to run on its own platform. And that can still be in the cloud. So many companies, as you probably know, have moved everything to the cloud. So even their MES systems will run in the cloud at this point. So you have that option, but you would go to a private cloud where it's essentially like being on-prem in the sense that you have full control of that system. You can do customizations. And you can kind of make it your own. There's still advantages to the whole cloud approach, just in terms of the amount of infrastructure you have to take care of. You get some services from the provider. And so there are some possibilities there where it makes sense. Now, you start looking at really complex warehouses with lots of integration to automation tools. And now we're starting to look into where it might make sense to have the server sitting in the building with you. So, you think about embedded versus decentralized. Embedded's really cool in the sense that it simplifies the integration. So anytime you move to an external system, it's got to be integrated. So it has to share the master data. It has to move demand down to the warehouse system. Whereas if you do it embedded in S4HANA, all that goes away because it's sitting on the same platform. It's using all that same data. So it does simplify the process in general, because you're not dealing with SIFs and QRCs and IDOCs and all that good stuff. But again, going to a decentral model gives you additional flexibility. It gives you redundancy. So some cases where you might do that, if you have multiple instances of SAP operating together, or even different ERPs. So maybe you got SAP and you've got Oracle running somewhere else. Well, you can connect that to a single external decentralized EWM appliance, and therefore you can run your whole warehouse operation even though you have different ERPs feeding it. It's great from a redundancy perspective. So you can sync up the two systems. Let's say you lose your WAN, or you have to take your S4 client down for maintenance, regular maintenance that happens. Your warehouse keeps running. All the transactions queue up and the system sync back up automatically once the mothership comes back up, so to speak. There are some, in today's world with cybersecurity threats and such, there may be times where you have to take that WAN connection down on purpose, if you have a cyber attack going on. And therefore you could continue to run your warehouses potentially. So there's a lot of positive that comes from that redundancy that a decentralized system gives you. But it's also complexity that you have to think about. Now, the other thing to think about is, are you going to connect into any of your automated technologies? So ASRS systems, robots, RFID, If you're going to take advantage of the material flow system, which SAP offers in EWM, which is actually able to drive conveyors, it can connect directly into PLCs and direct movements within the warehouse. That's another case where decentral makes a lot of sense because you're reducing the latency in the process. Really high volume warehouses seriously want to consider, even though it's the most expensive and complex option, running decentralized is pretty cool. And one other thing you can think about is regionalizing it. So one company I worked with years ago had about 55 facilities. They don't want to put EWM in 55 facilities with 55 different sets of hardware. So, you know, they kind of clustered it regionally where maybe 5 or 10 plants would run on one system, and they did it that way. So there's some ways you can do that, which give you some of that redundancy, but also dial back the cost a bit. So integration's a big deal. So let's talk about that a little bit. Automation. So there are many things. The main thing I want to get from this discussion here is not so much how to do this. It's more from an art of the possible perspective. So in general, EWM has very robust integration capability. Sometimes we find that folks don't really understand. Oh, well, I've got to have these other systems to be able to enable automation. When the reality is that, you know, whether it's MFS or whether it's just the old school iDocs, EWM can integrate to it. So don't let that be something that prevents you from looking at EWM or as a tool for your system. One thing you do want to be thinking about from a technology perspective, though, is it is fairly modern. You're doing a lot of web-based things, so there may be some situations where if you're using maybe older RF guns with the old SAP console and WM, you may have to look at different devices on the floor. So be thinking about that on the front end as you're preparing for your migration. And there are a lot of different options. It doesn't necessarily have to be an RF gun. You can go to smaller handhelds. Some are even using the old iPod touches to keep it simpler. But key thing there is with the web interfaces and the mobile apps and the Fiori stuff, you may find that your existing handheld technology won't work with that. So you may have to look at that as part of your migration. And so, you know, even there, if you want to go even to a different level, there are entire packages of mobile apps that are fully baked and ready to roll for EWM that you can just buy and install. It adds some cost, but, you know, it's a simplification in terms of the implementation. So keep that in mind. You know, think of EWM as your traffic cop and being able to talk to all these different systems and play that role as traffic cop in the grand scheme of things. So how do you make this decision? This is me. I'm not indecisive, but I'm really not sure about it either. So keep in mind, I mentioned complexity. So general guidelines, not a one size fits all situation. Tailor your solution for your business complexity. That you don't have to put the same model in every single warehouse. So that's a great point to think about. Tailor it to what you need. You might still go for decentralized, even if you don't have a super complex environment, just for that redundancy. And a lot of manufacturing plants like to do that, even if maybe your warehouse isn't super complicated. Maybe you're running MII on the floor and you want to have EWM sitting there with it, just to provide that additional redundancy. So that's definitely an option to think about. And start simple where you can. So maybe you go, when you do your migration, if you're a mature user of WM today in ECC, when you migrate, maybe you just go with basic as a starting point and then look to expand into more advanced features down the road. Anytime you're making a system migration like this, you have to consider the complexity of it, the change management involved. And so the more that you can kind of simplify that model going over and then take advantage of additional functionality going forward. And always be thinking too about, how do I run the business? So often, and this is really why Reveal exists, so often the implementation teaches you how to use transactions, but it doesn't really teach you how to integrate it all together end to end and how to use the tool to actually optimally run your business. So be thinking about that as well. Way too often we focus on, oh, do this transaction, do that transaction, and people have no idea why they're even doing it. So we really want you to be thinking about, how do I use this tool to really optimize my business processes? So just in terms of complexity, I had a couple quick stories to share, and then we'll wrap it up. So, you know, we had a experience here not too long ago where, you know, we see a client that everybody's really eager about automation. Oh, we got to have RFID. Oh, we got to have slotting. Oh, we got to have all this. The whole thing needs to be automated. Well, if your warehouse is really small, and when I say really small, I'm talking about like you could probably jump across it in 5 steps. You probably want to be careful about that. So do you really need slotting in a really small warehouse? Probably not. There's probably some things that you can do in terms of just kind of offline analytics, whatever. There's plenty in the basic software package to be able to figure some of that stuff out in a slow-paced facility. So don't think of just because I can means I should kind of deal, right? Another example, company implemented advanced, like the full boat EWM, and then set everything up on a fixed bin strategy. So that's kind of like buying a sports car and not putting tires on it. Why do that? If you're going to go fixed bin, keep it simple. There's no need to implement all that extra technology, all that extra complexity. So keep that in mind. Those are big things to think about. Licensing, it changes all the time. Keep in touch with your SAP reps around that. Hardware, again, depending on how you deploy, it can be sitting with your S4 environment, or it can be separate. And all of that drives the amount of support that goes on. So your IT strategy, are you a cloud-based organization, or are you an on-prem organization? All of that feeds into how you choose this model. So we could go on for a long time around that, but I want to wrap it up quickly with Skinnle around just how do we get ready. I've already covered this a little bit, so we won't spend more time on it, but really think this through and remember, again, doesn't have to be the same for every facility. So if you've got distribution centers that need advanced, fine. You don't necessarily have to put that in your manufacturing facility if you don't. But Skinnle, I'll hand this over to you and let you wrap it up.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the biggest recommendation, start your housekeeping now. You don't need to wait for any of that. You want to get your dates clean. You want to really start and maintain all that stuff now, because, right, those problems, if you don't establish that ownership and get your house in order now, you're just going to carry these problems into EWM. So you could start that now. The second thing I would recommend is start to understand some of the terminology there, and really, if you're not utilizing some of these features now in WM, such as storage sections or storage bin types, well, they're still in EWM. So that doesn't mean you can't leverage them now, get familiar, test it out, to utilize now, right? Because they're going to carry over. But then also start to educate yourself on the new terms and really features. There's no TOs in WM. There's now warehouse activity or tasks, warehouse order, work orders, etc. So really start to educate yourself on that and the capability. So to wrap up everything in general, right? Again, WM fully integrated for now. It's excellent tool. I highlighted a lot of features maybe that you have known, or transactions that you didn't know, but that can help you clean your house, get things in order now. EWM, it's going to be S4HANA's standard WMS solution. There's upgrades from the basic, but then also from the advanced. Really, your migration path, you're just going to have to determine what's best for your business. What are the requirements? So do you want to go with your EWM basic or advanced? It all depends, again, on like what myself and Jason touched on, your size, your volume, your industry. Take into consideration all of those things, but the biggest thing is you got to educate yourself.
So quickly, things are changing quickly. We'll share this out there for you. The Roadmap Explorer, this will give you a view as to what new functionality SAP is looking at over the next several releases of EWM. So you can keep an eye on that if you have your Service Marketplace ID. And then the community forums, there's a lot of good topics out there, blog posts. Typically there'll be blog posts around new releases and some of the key new functions that are being introduced. So good way to keep in touch. As you know, we do these webinars periodically, but things change so quickly. It's a good way to keep in touch and kind of educate yourself on more of the details around what's going on. And as I said, if we don't touch on something today that you're interested in, by all means, feel free to reach out to us. We can help you as you develop your plan going forward. So we've got a few minutes left for some questions, Sam, if you've got any queued up there.
We do have some questions. The first one is EWM Advanced worth the extra cost?
I'll just jump in from, I think, again, it goes back to what you really have to analyze your situation. And there's situations like what Jason said, you don't need a bazooka for for a smaller warehouse, but at the same point, there's excellent features that you didn't get. And for myself, coming from the WM world and knowing that our requirements were all those things that weren't in WM at the time, for the warehouse I ran, I would certainly gear towards EWM Advanced. And again, every situation is different. So from that aspect, for the size, for our complexity, I would say EWM Advanced was absolutely worth it. But beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So
for sure, very much worth the right situation.
Our next question is EWM easier to use than WM?
it would. So if you had issues in WM, they'll probably just be the same, if not more, in EWM, I would say. Again, the terminology has changed. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that carry over, but then there's certainly some aspects that change. There's new functions and features. It's easier from the standpoint, I think we mentioned the Fiori tile. So once you're in, once you really do a sound job of understanding and put that time into education up front, go through many scenarios in your testing, and then, but the ease of use really, I think, comes from the Fiori tiles and the integration of what we talked about, because now everything is in SAP, right? All those features that may have broken that integration. So it is a lot easier from that standpoint because it's a fully integrated system.
Sure, I think to reinforce the point earlier is make sure your team is educated and they understand how to use the tool, not just how to execute transactions, but really how to get value out of the system, how to use the analytics to keep things running efficiently. Don't get caught up with just being able to execute transactions and thinking that's going to get you over the hump. Then you're building a really expensive transaction database then. So there's so much more value to be gotten out of it with a well-educated team.
Awesome. Then we have a question from Bradley. He says, can you speak to the user adoption for what it takes for technicians and operators to use WM or EWM to run the business? We are in the boat of having many folks on seeing SAP as anything but a transactional tool. Can you provide some color on success stories and challenges of folks who weren't using WM/EWM and are now using this as a part of their daily work?
Scale, I think that tees you up really well to talk about, we're just coming out of a transformation where you had like massive impact on the team in terms of WM usability. So if you've got another story, by all means go for it, but I love that one, so I figured I'd tee you up.
Yeah, so one of the last clients simply used, right, it started with the education standpoint, not understanding a lot of the standard tools, storage sections and these storage bin types, but and a few of the warehouses really they were record keeping books in WM. So that was the nice part of the education and the journey with this client, is educating them on the art of the possible, and really, hey, you don't need to do this click, this lookup, this every single time that you receive a material. Like, going back to what I mentioned earlier, SAP is a rules-based engine. So you just have to understand those rules, determine kind of what you want SAP to do. So what is that material flow? And then in place that rule, it's usually just like a one-time master data input with some maintenance, right? But then you're eliminating that every single manual process, that every single that lookup. So it was nice to see kind of the light bulbs click, and then more so the time back, the labor savings, but really leveraging those rules in the system to automate the process. And again, it goes back to consistency. Like the transformation was really rewarding from just simply what we do, educating and finding the right solution, right, and having the users just go through that whole experience with automating some of the processes.
To just wrap that up for Bradley, it's a quality of life improvement for the people that have to do the job every day. So that's absolutely possible, but it goes to that next level. You have to go beyond transactional and really learn how to use the system to run the business. But you can make a huge impact on your team, and you know, we've done this over and over again in terms of being able to really get people to understand how powerful SAP is. So it's absolutely possible. And if you want to talk more about it, by all means, reach out to us. But I think you're on the right track, it sounds like, with that question.
Awesome, guys. We have another one from Monique. She says, would EWM be beneficial to the model implemented with the Department of Defense, or has DoD explored EWM options?
Yeah, I think definitely there's some applications in the DoD. We have some ongoing discussions at the moment and doing some R&D type work in that space, particularly with the defense solution. You know, it introduces a whole bunch of cool new things like force elements that take the org structure to a whole different level. So yeah, absolutely, there are definitely applications within the DoD. I know there's a big push too around automation, and EWM is great in terms of being able to enable some of that. So I think from a strategic perspective, you know, so much of what you see in the DoD is we built a purpose-built solution for one thing, and then we built another one for something else, and the integration breakdown isn't. They don't necessarily talk to each other really well. And I think what's interesting is SAP with the DFPS solution can do pretty much the whole end-to-end business process and do it really well. And Force Elements takes it to a whole different level. So I think there's a lot of opportunity on the DoD side to leverage EWM as well as S4 in general.
All right. Thank you both, Jason and Steve, for sharing your knowledge with us around extended warehouse management features compared to ECC's warehouse management. We want to let you know about our next webinar, Business Guide to S4 versus Sale Order Monitoring and ATP, on August 16th. This webinar will explore the basic working day behind sales order monitoring and ECC versus Fiori, along with the vigilance to change management it takes to properly pilot that change. Today's webinar will be available later today on our website under the Insights tab. You will also find all previously recorded webinars and other educational content, such as white papers, blogs, and client successes. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.